Tad dhit ta ta jham dhit ta dhanam ta tarum tarigidaka jham tarigidaka
tat dit ta ta jam dit ta dhanam ta tarum tarigidaka jam tarigidaka.
Before we dive into today's episode, there's a couple of things we want to say. First of all, a huge thank you to every one of you listening to the podcast. We crossed 1,000 downloads in the last couple of weeks. Thank you as well to our newly subscribed Patreon supporters. This is a passion project that we want to continue long term, so every bit of support helps. If you like what you're hearing, please consider either joining us as a Patreon supporter or sharing your favorite episode with at least 2 of your friends. Coming to today's episode, this conversation was recorded in March and does not reference any of the current economic and political turmoil impacting the people of Sri Lanka. Our hearts are with Sri Lanka, and our solidarity is with those who are working to build a more equitable future there. As a reminder, Off-Season Chats is a series of conversations we are having with dancers who move and inspire us. You can catch our previous conversations with Kirtana Ravi, Kaustavi Sarkar, and Sai Venkata Gangadhar on our website, offthebeat.dance, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Today, we're going to have an off-season chat with our 4th guest. She is the principal dancer and a teacher at the world-renowned Chitrasena School of Dance in Colombo, Sri Lanka, a seasoned performer and the youngest granddaughter of Guru Chitrasena and Vajira. She has been performing Kandyan dance internationally since the age of 12. Please welcome to Off-Season Chats, Thaji Dayas.
Thaji, it's wonderful to have you. We're just thrilled to be able to have this conversation, which not only will push the scope of Off the Beat further beyond South Indian classical dance as we focus much of it in season 1, but we're starting to venture into the world of Sri Lankan traditional and contemporary dance with you. Tell us about your artistic journey.
So I'm part of the Chitrasena family. So, dance has really been a part of my life from the day I was born. I naturally just came into the dance because it's a part of my family, like my entire family. They're all dancers, starting from my grandfather and my grandmother, my aunts, my mother, my sisters. It's really been a very organic journey. There weren't really hard decisions or things I had to make. So in one sense, I can say that I've, always really done what I love to do. There have never been points in my life where, I had to rethink or overthink over, certain decisions that I had to make, because I was always quite sure that I wanted to become a dancer. And because of that, I actually stayed in Sri Lanka. I didn't actually go abroad to study, unlike my sisters, because my cousin Heshma, she's the artistic director of the dance company, and she has studied in the US. She has a theater arts degree from Berkeley. She was in the US for about 10 years. And my sister, Umi, she's the manager of the company. So she studied in India for about 4 years. So they were both out for quite some time. But for me, soon after I left college, I was quite certain that I didn't want to go anywhere. I didn't want to do anything else. And I just wanted to be, dancing full time and being a part of the company and performing with them and touring with them. And that's what made me happy. And that's what I did.
Could I delve a little bit more into what it was like to be immersed in the arts? I know in my own personal experience with Kandyan dance, I must say that it was really wonderful to see how many dancers are also percussionists in the style. And so I wanted to just kind of delve a little bit more into what was it like to be in classes as a kid, surrounded by family that also are artists? And was your training very formalized or institutionalized, or was it sort of through osmosis or a combination of both?
I'll just talk a bit about Kandyan dance and what kind of form it is. It's a very masculine form, and it's born from a village ritual. So there's a lot of chanting, there's a lot of drumming, and actually the dance aspect of it came in much later. So the chanting and the drumming is how it all started. If you have seen rituals in Kerala, in the Kathakali rituals, I've heard that it's very similar to that. They go on all night and it's done to appease the gods for prosperity, to cure illnesses and so on. The ritual still exists, and in the ritual, the males are the only ones who perform in the ritual. So So my grandfather learned the traditional form, and this was like soon after independence. So that's when he started in 1944. He started his school, and he kind of realized that after the British invasion, there were certain things that came into the country, like dance forms. People were starting to do the jive and the cha-cha, and those were becoming very popular. So the traditional forms were kind of slowly diminishing. So he realized that there was a need to kind of resurrect it in some way. So he brought it on to the stage. It was condensed, it was polished. He and my grandmother created this vocabulary or training method. So we have at the Chitrasena school a separate syllabus that we follow to learn this dance form. Whereas if you're a ritual dancer, then the way you learn the dance form is very different. All the traditional gurus, they have their own way of teaching it, right? So there's no particular strict way of doing anything. This form itself, it's like I was saying, very masculine. We have lots of jumps and turns. It's very grounded. So again, it's very much like the Kathakali form. Even the main stance is very similar. It's a very deep-seated position. So my grandfather actually went to India and he learned Kathakali for many years. He was at Shantiniketan, he was at Kerala Kalamandalam. In our training, we have a lot of Kathakali exercises that we do as well because it helps us. I think when it comes to our training, it is very tough and rigid. And of course, the teachers I've had who are my family, starting from my grandmother to my aunt, they're very strict teachers. And to learn an art form like this, that is needed in one way. If you are going to learn this and to do it as a profession, I think that kind of strict, rigid kind of training is needed. I don't know. I kind of enjoy that in one sense. But for some, it just doesn't work. I know in this day and age, there are a lot of students who can't handle that training. You know, we talk about these old gurus who make you sit for hours and hours and then do the same step for like weeks and weeks. And for me, that's how I was trained. And I kind of enjoyed that training because it really pushed me to my limits. You really push yourself. And if you really want to do it, you really push yourself to the limit. Learning under my family was never easy because for them, it was, if you're family, then you have to work double the time and put double the energy into doing what you're doing. After a while, you actually start thinking, okay, I mean, if I'm going to be the principal dancer of the company, then, you know, people would say, oh, it's all within the family. No one else, you know, there's no one else coming up. So that was a pressure for me. I didn't come to this place because I'm family. It's really because of my hard work. And I know people who are with me would know that and who dance with me and my dance colleagues and my teachers. I mean, that has in one sense been a bit of a pressure for me. I do work double the time and put in double the energy because I know as someone from the family who's continuing the legacy, the hopes are very high. The bar has been set very high. So to kind of maintain those standards, it's just constantly you're pushing yourself. And even if you take a break one day, you start to regret it, or you're like, oh, I mean, I shouldn't have taken a break today. I should have done this, or I should have done that. There's never a moment where you're at peace because even after a performance, you're like, oh, the next day I'll take a break. But then you end up like going for a walk or for a jog or something because you just want to keep your body active and like you feel like you've done something for the day, even if you've not practiced. So yeah, I think coming to your question, I think learning under my family has in one way had a very positive effect on me because they've really pushed me and they've been really strict with me. So that I think has helped me to come to where I am today.
Thank you. That was lovely because you touched upon many key things, especially about family legacy and the expectations of upholding and continuing a family legacy. When you are on your own and forging your path, you don't have somebody in the family that is the example. It can be kind of terrifying, but at the same time, you're the one holding the ratchet in the forest and hacking away at the trees and the weeds, but you're creating the path. In this case, it sounds like you're doing a bit of both. You're not only forging your own path, but you also have a bit of the torch that you can have from the family lighting the path as well to help you along the way, which I think you have made a really good point It's not just about family legacy. It's about hard work. It's about dedication to craft. It's about dedication to technique and to artistry. It's not an easy path.
This is something that has been coming down through years in the family. We were never forced into it. So my father, who is Guru Chitrasena's son, is not a dancer. So he was into sports, he was into rugby and cricket, and he's now an electronic engineer. My grandmother did try to make him dance, and he did dance for some time, but he was just not into it. So my grandfather never forced him and said, just because you're my son, you have to do this. So even for us, we never kind of had that pressure of you have to do this. Actually, my grandfather said, if this is something y'all can't do, just don't do it. Just let it go. It's okay. Like those were kind of his last words.
And I know you mentioned that you just knew that you wanted to be a dancer. And so you just followed that. But when you're navigating things like COVID and so all these different challenges, big and small, that come through, how much does this idea of legacy factor into how you navigate these things?
In one way, it is important to think of legacy and how it was done or how it was brought to this stage by my grandparents and my aunt. But after a certain point, you just can't. You have to find your own ways of how to do it and how to take it forward. So like I was saying, my cousin Heshma, who's the artistic director of the company. So every time we come up with a production or anything, like any kind of event, it's always within those certain principles that my grandparents followed, but she would always try to do things that would fit this time and day. So it's not like, oh, my grandparents did this, so we have to do that. That pressure is not there. So if that was there, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing right now. So we kind of do things our way, but of course, always thinking back on how my grandparents did it, but tweaking it to suit audiences today and, times now. So.
And in a way, that sounds like that's what they did in their time as well, right? They saw what the need of the moment was.
Exactly. So like bringing it onto the stage, even there were so many changes that the dance went through. So actually my grandfather, I think one of his first performances on stage, he was like booed off stage because he came from this English speaking family background. And then there he was on this stage in this traditional attire, like dancing. And people were like, what is this? So he was kind of booed off stage, but he was greatly also influenced by artists like Uday Shankar. My grandfather kind of figured out, okay, maybe if I tweak this costume a bit to suit the stage and to suit the form, maybe people would see something different in it and accept it. Or he wore this very kind of short costume where his body was very revealing. The form could be seen much more. Then people were like, oh, okay, what is this? So is this the same traditional form or is there something different in it? So, people were becoming very curious. So in one sense, the form also went through a lot of changes because we are, practicing a living art form. So it will evolve. You can't stop that, right? But how do you choose to evolve it or change it is the question.
This is very interesting because you can see this especially in Ameya style of dance in Kuchipudi with Vempati Chinnasatyam and how he also innovated a lot with the traditional style of Kuchipudi. There's some intriguing parallels here with Chitrasena's contribution to Sri Lankan dance at large that there is with, say, a figurehead like Vempati Chinnasatyam for Kuchipudi. The question that I wanted to segue into dovetails what you just spoke about changes that were introduced to the form not only through your grandfather, but through the work that you and your artistic director and cousin, Heshma, have been doing recently. What is the role of social media on your artistic and professional journey? And has that influenced the way in which you create work now or the way you teach now?
During COVID, obviously, everything went virtual. So, doing workshops and performances and, Zoom meetings and classes online. So all this is very, very new to us. In one sense, something we were not very open to because I think for us, you had to be in the moment with the people, with the drums, and that's how you've always connected with your art form, right? We couldn't just picture ourselves, in a Zoom meeting having one drummer in one place and then another dancer in another place, and then you're not in sync, there's a lag, and it's just not something we could do, right? So I think a good 7-8 months, we just didn't do anything. We didn't teach, we didn't perform because we didn't know how we were going to get on this new platform and get ourselves going. And people were already like starting on Zoom and doing these even performances. And it was just amazing to see also. I mean, it just depends on how you do it and how well it's filmed and all that. So for me, our dance forms, you have to have the live drumming to be able to really feel that connection with the form. And because the dance and the drummer has, we call it like a marriage. So there's a very strong connection between the dancer and the drummer. So the drummer follows the dancer. There are moments where the dancer follows the drummer. We interact with each other on stage. We dance together sometimes because most of our drummers are also dancers. That connection, I feel, is lost when, it's over a virtual platform. Even for the audience, it's very difficult to watch through a recording and figure out like what's going on, really feel it. For us, it really took a long time to get on these platforms and then start figuring out how to teach online. And because after a point, we just had to do it. Because there was no choice, because it wasn't like, okay, this was only for a few months, or then it became a year, and then it became 1.5 years and 2 years, and we're in the third year now. So we're like, okay, we have to start somewhere. So we got our online classes going over Zoom, and then we had to figure out a strict guideline on, how you follow class for a student, for a teacher, like how we instruct them online. Then the syllabus completely kind of changed online because we weren't able to follow our usual syllabus. So how we taught online, what we taught online, everything changed. And then we started getting these requests to do like workshops online. Then we had to figure out how to do that and how, setting up mics and setting up computers. It's just, everything was so new for us. Now we've kind of fallen into that whole pattern, but I don't think it's something we want to stick to on a permanent basis. Like, it's something really we can do without. And I'm just waiting to go back into like live performances and having a live audience in front of us. And you can't compare that feeling to anything else. That nothing can kind of match that. I know in these times you need to be out there for a greater reach. It's great to be online and on social media, and we're also trying to figure out how we can put some of our content out on YouTube. I think social media is great to get the kind of content you do out or to a broader audience, but I think it's very important to figure out what kind of content and how much you put out there, because I have this little issue of putting videos or stuff out on myself. I always feel like it's like monkey praising her own tail kind of situation. So I have that issue. So I always, unless someone else posts something, I'm not that person who's out there kind of posting videos or pictures of myself. Still trying to figure that out, as you can see.
Yeah, and I think the rules changed, right? Earlier on in the pandemic, it was much more raw, the videos that were being posted. Over the course of the, last 2+ years, now you have these like extremely polished clips. One thing that Kiran and I definitely have had conversations about over the last couple of years is the nature of what is danced itself changing, right? Coming from like a Kuchipudi background, being more familiar with Bharatanatyam, if we do a whole performance, there's the build up and then you're warmed up and then you do the slower pieces and then you end with a finale. You don't have that when you're putting a reel or a clip. There's a very small slice of the form.
I don't know, that first small clips, you can only put a certain amount, like there's a time period.
Like a minute or so.
Yeah, which is also, interesting. Like you said, video qualities and all that have really improved. And I saw recently there was this project an artist had done, and it was very interesting how they had done it. So they were focusing on like certain aspects in dance forms, like if it's expression or if it's a mudra, or so it's just like one aspect of the form. So you like really delve into that only, and just within that, whatever, 1 minute or 30 seconds, you just only see that, which was, I thought was quite interesting. So
It is. At the same time, it's like you had to rethink content for a virtual format versus stage. And so the repertoire changes completely.
When we perform, we have at least like 5 or 6 drummers playing for us, and they're all outdoor drums, so they're very loud. And, for some, it can be too much, but for their ears. But for us as dancers, the louder and the more drummers, the more energy you kind of receive from them. So yeah, that has been one of our main challenges to try to figure out, even if we do any kind of thing online, how do you get that same intensity for the drums? So I know there are certain recording techniques and that can be figured out now with like technology. And
it costs money though.
Exactly. That's the other thing. So yeah, but it's just a matter of time and trying to figure out how to do those things.
And I think there's really something about being in a physical space, being in community with people, right? And, the way that connection in physical space in a performance or practice or what have you, you can't replicate that virtually.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, after being away from all of it for about, 1.5, 2 years, and we finally started physical classes, you actually feel the change. Like you start to feel those connections again, and the way you practice the form, the way you feel it, everything just starts changing. And it was a very difficult time during the pandemic to continue my practice. I went through a very low period. And during the start of this year, we started physical classes, and immediately, I could feel the change inside me. Like for the first time, my mood, my body, the way I eat, everything just started changing, and it was amazing. Actually, it was amazing to just kind of feel that change also in me, so it was just great to be back in the studio again.
I think it's one of those things where after having to give it up, when you get it back, it becomes that much more precious. Kind of taking this into the areas of a little bit of speculation, I guess. Where do you see dance going in the next 5 years or so?
That's a very tricky question. I've been asked this question a couple of times, but I've never really had a solid answer to it. When my grandfather brought the dance form onto the stage, he did it with very good intentions. You wanted to resurrect the form, you wanted to let it be seen in a new light, but you didn't want to harm it or, tamper with the essence of it. And he didn't actually. So because our art form's been brought down from generation to generation through a lot of challenges, like the traditional gurus, the way they practice the form, they have no financial support, but they still keep doing what they love to do. And it's the tradition of our country, right? So they do it with a lot of pride. And when my grandfather took that step to bring it onto the stage, he always went back to the roots, and he was very sensitive to what the traditional gurus did and how they did it. And even when bringing it onto the stage, he was very careful about how he would change it or experiment within it. He did it with a lot of good intentions, but I don't think he kind of saw where it was going to go from there. For my grandparents, they really just love to dance and they love to perform, they love to teach, and that was it. There was nothing beyond that because it's such a rich art form. They wanted to experiment with it, and that was their intention. There was nothing else. Even for us as the third generation of the company, what you see today is a very watered down version of all that. In one sense, it's a little disheartening, but as a performer, you have to, or you want to keep maintaining those standards that have been brought down for so many generations. But to keep doing it in that way is very difficult. Now, especially financially, it becomes very difficult. So in Sri Lanka, there are no dance festivals. Unless you organize your own performance, there's no real support like that. Even the government, they have their own dance troupes. So that's what the government supports. So private companies, they basically have to pave their own path. But in this time and day, it's very difficult to get anyone to financially support you in that way because everyone's struggling right now with the economic crisis in the country. We do for ourselves, and then we kind of have to figure out how to keep the traditional gurus also going because they are our inspiration. to do this. If they don't continue to do what they do, we're not going to have inspiration to work with going forward. Not just dance, even the drumming teachers, the mask makers, the costume makers, we have to make sure that they're all taken care of. While teaching the next generation, we also have to look at how our earlier generations are doing and are they able to continue their art form. So it's a lot of going back and forth within the company, like how do we sustain these people? How do we get them to continue to do what they're doing? So we've kind of blocked out that whole thing of where is the dance heading because we have no control over that. Within the company, we have control over what we do, right? We do things kind of concentrating on those people. In 2018, we did this festival called the Guru Gedara Festival, which was a brainchild of my cousin Heshma. We have a very beautiful and very simple space where our studio is with a little garden. So in the garden space, she put up these tents and we had these gurus from different traditional backgrounds like mask making and costume making and drum making and pandal making. So they'd make these pandals here with the banana tree trunk. We brought in those gurus and we had a 4-day festival of where we celebrating the gurus who have paved this path for us to become stage performers or, traditional stage dancers. So it is the ritual artists who have inspired us to come to this place, really. So that's why we always looking back into our roots, because it's very important to know where you come from. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to figure out where you're going or where you want to go.
I'm going to kind of ask a loaded question. I hope you don't mind. It sounds like Chitrasena is really dedicated to, sustaining itself as like sort of a cottage industry of Sri Lankan heritage, not only in terms of just dance and music, in terms of visual art. Is that something where you see Chitrasena continuing to further develop in 5 years?
All these allied arts are very important for the continuation of what we do as dancers. Definitely focusing on those things. So even the Guru Gedara Festival, we are hoping to do different versions of it. So even in 2018 when we did it, we had, all these artists doing workshops and masterclasses. And so people in Colombo, I think, mainly got a taste of what these art forms are. Because actually, you'd be surprised, there are people in Colombo and around the country who do not know that these art forms exist. In one sense, it was very educational for the audience to know what these art forms are and how they're also connected. And I think that's definitely something, even in another 5 years, where we'll be looking to develop and do different festivals and workshops. We were planning on doing like a fringe festival where there are little concentrated kind of workshops on some of these artists, because none of them have support to do what they're doing. So as a traditional contemporary company now based in Colombo, that's what we're mainly focusing on doing, kind of bringing these art forms out into Colombo and really kind of trying to educate the audience that there is a rich cultural heritage here that we need to promote and we need to support. So I think that's definitely something we'll be focusing on.
Yeah, you said something very important. It's about cultivating an audience. I think that's the challenge for where dance is going. It has to be in conversation with the idea of cultivating a new audience. The average age of the Rasika, as we call them, for Indian classical dance is 60 and above. My own friends who were my age, many of them were non-dancers, were not interested in coming to it because I felt like they weren't given the right kind of introduction to the forms. But if it's presented and packaged in such a way where it's sort of essential knowledge, like the way that you're doing with Chitrasena, even though this is where dance is going to be heading towards, cultivating new audiences, you have the brilliance of a tradition that is so multifaceted that speaks for itself in many ways.
I remember when we were talking about Music Academy and performing in Chennai. This was back in 2012. I don't know how it is now. But everybody in the audience, mainly elderly people, they keep tal and they know everything. I mean, I was really amazed because we don't get audiences like that in Sri Lanka where, they're so connected with what is going on stage. Like they know everything, the tal system, they'll be clapping and putting the tal. And that was something that really stuck with me when I went to Chennai and we went to watch the music festival and the dance festival. Yeah, that was a great experience there.
Segueing into something a little bit different, what is the best advice you've received during your dance journey so far?
At one point, I really wanted to try to apply to university in Sri Lanka because we have a visual and performing arts university. I think it's like one of the only 2 universities in South Asia or something. But I wanted to apply there because I wanted a kind of different experience to what I was getting during that time through the dance. Not particularly practically, but theoretically, like I wanted to learn the theory of it. But I think one of the best advices I got was not. It's like a 4-year degree and we have so many students from the university coming into our company to learn dance. And we always ask them like, what were you learning for 4 years? Because it's like you have to start from scratch. You have to completely erase everything and start from scratch. And it's like those years that they were in university, I have really developed myself as a dancer much, much more. And the kind of experience I've gained as a dancer through those years is much, much more. And I think if you want to be a stage performer, I don't think going to university here is the greatest decision to make. So I think that was definitely great advice that I got from not just my family, but from other artists as well. So performers, we have such a short period of time. I mean, my grandparents and my aunt, they all dance till they're 60, but I don't know how, it's going to be for me. My body is very different. How I do things is very different to them. So that's what I mean. Those 4 years, even these 2 years during COVID, was torture because you're constantly thinking like, oh my God, what is my body doing? My body's not doing anything.
There's so many facets, right, to any art. We need the thinkers, but we need the doers, and we need audience, and we need the musicians, and we need the visual artists. And I think it's important to know that, we can't do it all, but we just need different people to go towards what speaks to them so that as a whole, we're able to keep things moving.
I have a strong base where, I have the Chitrasena company to go and, dance with and perform with. But a lot of students who come out of the university here with the degree certificate, basically you get a teaching post. You're kind of put into some rural area, school, or if you don't get a teaching post, then you are put in an AG office to do a desk job. These students come to us and be like, Miss, I'm doing this desk job and this is not what I want to do. And, what do I do? So for us as a company, we have this scholarship program, again, something that my cousin Heshma started, where we give opportunities like a scholarship to students who would like to continue dance as a profession. So it's like a 2-year intense training every day. They have to commit every day, and basically we provide them lodging and we give them a small fee for their food and, basic. So it's only about 10 students who get the opportunity to do that. So we have an audition and we choose. And so when we have students who come in like that, who are really passionate about doing dance on a long-term basis, then we offer these scholarships. But what happens is after the 2 years done, when they have to go out on their own and figure out what they want to do, they're not able to support themselves to go forward after that. They have the option of joining the company if they would like to stay with us. But for them to venture off on their own, they don't have support. And even as a company, we're not able to support them in a huge way. So then it becomes difficult for them, and then, they have to do some jobs. So it's like a vicious cycle. Like there's no proper answer to any question.
No, and I think that's what is hard to navigate with art, because what do we need to do to make it sustainable? I don't think that's anything that individuals or even individual companies can solve for. That's something that has to come across the society as a whole, right? I think these are hard questions that we really have to come together collectively to solve for. And there isn't necessarily one right answer, right? I think what's possible in a city is different from what's possible in rural areas. The kind of support that might be available in one part of the world might not be as doable elsewhere. And then things like pandemics happen.
Yeah, the students, like the other options of, if you want to continue to dance, you have these events that you can go to and you do like this welcome dancing things and, at a wedding, which we as a company, we don't do. For students, after their training period is over, for them to figure out what to do and what path to go on is very difficult here in Sri Lanka, because if you want to earn the money, then there are ways of doing it. It's a very difficult path for an artist, I would say, here.
The last question that we have, that is the deep diving sort of questions. Are there any projects that you're working on right now that you'd like to share or discuss?
We're working with this German artist. So there's a dramaturg and then there's this other lady who is into theater and film. And so they kind of approached us with this project. So we have this huge history and archives with us from the 1930s. So they wanted to really dive into those archives and see how dance has evolved, how the legacy has evolved through these 3 or 4 generations. So actually, we're the 4th generation on stage, because my great-grandfather was also like a Shakespearean actor and director. And I think in 2017, if I'm not mistaken, they came down to Sri Lanka and we started shooting. And so they were focusing on the women in the family. So it's mainly about my grandmother, my aunt, Upeka, who was the principal dancer before me, and also my teacher, my guru. And then they were going to focus on me. So these 3 generations, and also focusing on 3 periods in our country during that time. So during my grandmother's period, where it was just post independence, and then my aunt's period, where during the Civil War. And now when it comes to me, with all the development and then the challenges of the pandemic, how this art form has continued and has evolved through time and challenges. And we haven't really had a formal performance of it, because it's actually, I'm not quite sure what you call it. It's like an installation. So there are screens and there's live performance, there are videos going on, there's dialogue, there's chanting. So there's all of these different aspects in it. And it was very interesting for me, because I wasn't only dancing, there's acting, there's dancing, there's singing, and so all of these different things. So I really love being a part of that whole process, and I hope we'll be able to perform it soon. But with the pandemic, everything kind of was stalled and we couldn't meet. But they actually did kind of a virtual version of it in Berlin. Like, you had to wear these 3D glasses and you were able to watch the whole thing through that. I'm not sure how the whole experience was, because we weren't there to actually see it. But I heard that it was really successful and that it went off really well. So I think sometime this year or next year, we're hoping to bring it down here. The next one is, of course, the collaboration with Nityagram. I think Kiran had seen Samhara, which was the first collaboration they did with us. And now we're working on this new production. Actually, we toured it once in the US in 2019 called Ahuti. We're supposed to be touring it sometime end of this year. We're not quite sure of the schedule. It hasn't been confirmed yet. Yeah, that's something exciting that's coming up as well, hopefully. And the other project is actually my grandmother just turned 90 years old, I think, in March, on the 15th of March.
Wow.
So,
Happy birthday.
So, we couldn't do anything big for her, but we did like this very private performance at the dance school itself. But my cousin and my sister, Umi, they're working with another artist from Germany to do like a virtual exhibition on my grandmother's life and journey through the dance. So I think it's supposed to come out sometime next week. So it will be available online very soon. for everyone to see.
Yeah, that's amazing. How do you say grandmother in Sinhalese?
Achi.
Achi. Do you say Vajira Achi?
No, I just say Achi.
Achi. I mean, in terms of protocol, like, would you say Vajira Achi?
No, then, I mean, all the outsiders say Vajra Miss. Miss is like teacher or,
Yeah.
Yeah, but
We say the same
I
thing
don't
in
know why we say Miss.
Ma'am
but we
or
say-
Miss.
Yeah.
From Off the Beat, we'd love to say a very, very special happy birthday to Vajira Achi. I know I'm not supposed to say that, Vajira Miss, but we want to wish you a very, very happy 90th birthday. It's a huge milestone.
My grandmother, we call her the living fire because my cousin, when she was in uni in the US, she had to write something on my grandmother and she titled it The Living Fire. She has this willpower to do things no matter what. I think in one sense, the whole company kind of continued its work because of her, because my grandfather was, after a certain time, he was very frustrated with the way things were going and how dance was turning out. And I don't think he was very happy. So he kind of gave up in one sense, but my grandmother is the one who kind of took it on and said, no, we have to do this. Let's just do it. So she's the one who got all the performances going. And my grandfather used to be the one who used to look at the larger picture. But my grandmother was the one doing all the nitty gritty work and getting everything on stage. So even today at the age of 90, she would say, why don't you do this? And why don't you do that? Let's do a new production or let's get some ideas. And so she's always like full of energy and wanting to do things. So she's really our inspiration, even as the third generation. So it's really great to have a living example like that in your life who hasn't given up even at 90. So, at the age of 30, 33, I'm also like, oh no, I have another 60 years to go if I live that long.
We're going to sort of turn the questions a little bit. This is hopefully going to be a little bit fun.
Okay.
Just
is this your surprise segment?
Well, yeah, these are sort of the rapid fire questions. These are not necessarily that serious.
You have to excuse me if my answers are not so rapid.
So I'm just going to jump into the first one. So what's your theme song? If you had a theme song, what would it be?
Someone's answering from the back. No, if I had a theme song, wow, I've not even thought about that. If I had a theme song, wow, I'm sorry, this is taking a lot of time. Like I said, my answer is not so rapid. Yeah, a song that I listen to all the time. Not necessarily because it has to do anything with life or whatever, or how I'm feeling, but it's just a great song. I love this artist called Abhi Sampa. Yeah, so there's this song of hers. It's like a Qawwali song sung to the gods that, I listen to all the time these days. So that has been my theme song. Most of her songs are like my theme songs these days. So
Next question is a fill in the blank. If I could collaborate with anybody, dead or alive, I would choose blank.
Well, Nityagram, I think any day, any time, even if they're dead or alive, I think. I think Nityagram would be that any day. Like Shrupadi, I think working with her has been a pivotal moment in my career. And definitely Nityagram.
Hello, Shrupa Didi, if you're listening.
If you could only perform one piece for the rest of your life, what would you choose?
One piece. Wow, that's so difficult. There are so many pieces that I love performing. I have to say, like, my cousin's choreography, Heshma, again, has molded me into the dancer I am today. It's just not enough to be a great dancer. You also have to have the right choreography that suits you and brings out the best in you. So I'm extremely lucky to have her as my choreographer now. Most of her pieces are very challenging to perform because there's also a lot of emotion in it. But, Kandyan dance is not an emotive dance form. So we just emit pure joy when we dance. It's unlike in Indian classical forms where you tell a story through the form. Our form is just an abstract dance form, kind of like ballet. But with her choreography, I think we've actually started to explore that emotion through form and what it's telling you as a dancer and what it could tell an audience. So all of her pieces have been extremely challenging to perform, and I love to be challenged. So in terms of the pieces that she has choreographed for me, I would say I think Moksha is one of the pieces that she did for me in 2014, if I'm not mistaken. And I've had a very weird relationship with that piece because I used to love performing it at one point, and then I started to hate performing it because I was just not getting in it. I was just completely disconnected. I wasn't feeling right when I was performing it. It felt like alien to my body. And then again, after a certain period of time, I started performing it again and kind of becoming comfortable with it. With time, it's now that I'm actually starting to connect with the piece. In terms of my grandmother's pieces that she's choreographed for my aunt, I think Ridhma Ranga is a pure dance piece, a Kandyan piece, is something I really enjoy performing all the time, anytime. It's a piece that was choreographed for my aunt, Upeka, in, I think, 1980s.
Train or plane to a dance performance?
I think train. Yeah, if it's in Sri Lanka, I think train, because the train journeys are so beautiful here. Anyway,
But
here
yes.
we don't travel from city to city on a plane because, it doesn't take that long. So it's a small country.
What's your favorite meal after a performance?
I shouldn't be the one talking about meals because I'm a very poor eater. My family would be laughing if they're listening to this and be like, oh, look at her talking about food. But after a performance, I crave sweets. Like I crave things like cakes, and I love chocolate chip cookies and all junk. But but I crave sweets after dancing. So
What's one thing people get wrong about you?
I don't know, really. But I feel
Your partner's in the back. You can ask him, right?
He'd have a whole list of things to say. But no. But I think in general, when it comes to people, I think I don't express myself too well. I'm not very open. I tend to, bottle things up. So then people tend to read me in a wrong way, I feel. I think it's very important to say what you feel, especially to family and, your partner or your friends. But sometimes when you tend to bottle up or when you go silent, even they start to sometimes read you in a wrong way. So I think that has happened to me a couple of times. Yeah, I'm still learning through my mistakes.
What might be something that your best friend teases you about?
Never having the time to meet up or, do anything basically. So they always tease me, even if we plan like to go on a trip or anything, they'd be like, oh, so can we get your dance schedule first? And let's work around that. But I'm so happy they think that way. I don't have to tell them, they already know. So those are the kinds of friends I love. So I don't have many friends. I have like 2 or 3 of them who really understand me in that way. So it's very easy. Like they know my needs all revolve around my dance. My life revolves around it. So they're like, okay, so now Thaji, can we know your dance schedule first before any of us figure out our schedule?
There can only be one dancer.
Exactly. In any kind of relationship.
I know. This is hashtag story of my life.
Right.
I missed so many friends' weddings from when I was in college because I was in India. So they'll be like, oh, he's probably not going to come anyway, dance. He's in India. And then they won't send me an invitation. I'm like, gee, thank you. It's kind of sad. But what's the best thing that happened to you this week?
This week?
We would love to say the podcast, but it doesn't be the podcast.
I should just say the podcast. I've been like kind of prepping for this and going through your, meticulously written emails and directions on how to, I was like, wow. I was showing my sister and saying like, oh, wow, look at this, how, meticulously it has been done and all the details in point form. And I hardly receive emails like that where even when you were invited to speak at anything, so detailed. And so I really like went through it so intently and I was really taken up. And so I think the podcast is definitely.
Thank you. Now, what do you really feel?
I don't know, this week, I think just doing, technique class and rehearsals. And I think those things have always been the highlight in my life. So, performances and opportunities come and go, people come and go, students come and go, but it's always great to know every week that your teachers and the colleagues you dance with, they're always there with you, so that, those technique classes become so important to me because of that. Even if it's like 2-3 people in class, those people are with you and they're going to be with you and your teacher is going to be sitting in front of you, correcting you. And I don't think everyone has that privilege as artists. So I think that's always the best thing for me every week, even if I don't hear some amazing news, just having those moments are very special for me. So that's what I look forward to during a week. So.
I think for me, it's uninterrupted studio time. Just like go there and you can practice your heart out. That's very hard to find.
Yeah, I think a lot of artists have that issue of studio time, whereas we're so privileged here to have the, school and the studio space we have right now. So, which my grandparents didn't have actually. They had to rent halls and go from studio to studio, doing what they were doing. But for us, we have this permanent space and it's our own space. We don't rent it out. We only use it for our work and practices and teaching and stuff. So it's like this 100-foot kind of long hall, which is completely empty and you can do whatever you want there. So it's just amazing to have that space. Yeah.
I love my fiance, but I always kind of think to myself, should I have gone with somebody who was rich so they can buy me a dance studio?
Yeah, actually, my family does that. They're like, oh, why can't you just like find someone who has some money who like support this whole company and, save us. Only you can do it. And I'm like, what? No. Yeah, I mean, it's important to have even a partner who understands what you're doing and who supports it. So I suppose another artist, or you'd imagine that they would understand you better in that sense. Even though there's no money. So I think the understanding and that is more important in one sense.
No, I think that really comes from, alignment and values, right? Because if the other person gets it, why we might be choosing something that's less lucrative or less quote unquote stable, then it becomes easier if we know someone's in our corner, as opposed to having another voice pressuring us to follow the safe path of a career as opposed to choosing art.
Yeah, I have to say, like, my cousin, my sister, they're not married to artists in that sense, but they have been really, really supportive of what we do as a family, as a company. And I think the women in the family are able to do what they do the way they do it because of their partners and, who have supported them throughout.
One of the ways that we end our episodes is we leave a call to action for our listeners. Is there a call to action that you'd like to share?
As an artist who is practicing and performing a traditional art form, I feel that anyone, from anybody practicing any South Asian forms, they're so rooted. They're art forms that are so rooted and rich in culture, heritage, and the history of your country. So in one sense, it's your identity. Even as a country, I feel like, especially in Sri Lanka, we're trying to find things to make us feel unique or bring out our identity, whereas people don't see that, your culture and heritage is what will do that. And I feel like here, people only start to think of culture and heritage when you have to go abroad to study or something. And then, you have to go to a university and be like, oh, this is my culture and heritage. And then they come to learn dance or music. It's not something that you can practice like that. It takes time. It takes energy. You have to invest your time into it. So if you're looking to be a professional dancer, I think it's important to figure out how you want to do it, because there are so many ways out there which can be appealing but may not always be the right way. There are so many things that come through the challenges where you want to figure out how you want to do this, because money also becomes an issue through all this. So I think COVID has been like one of the biggest challenges for me. It really tested me to figure out for myself and to know if this is really what I want to do. And if this is what I really love to do, then I would stick with it. And I'm so glad I'm here talking about this and saying I stuck with it and I stayed on. And this is definitely what I love to do, and I didn't let it go. So I think if I wanted to do it any other way, I had the options, to go through that, commercialized path. But I wanted to kind of go in reverse, not go back, but, go the other direction where I'm like, okay, I don't want to go with the flow and do what everyone else is doing. Because in my eyes, that didn't really fall in the way of how my grandparents did it. As an artist, it's constant questions to yourself during different times of your life, because it really comes out through the dance when you're dancing. If you're not in it, then it really comes out. And I think it's important to figure that out. You can't be one leg here, one leg there. Both legs have to be in the same place. So,
Thaji, it was such a pleasure having you join us on our off-season chats. Learned a lot, actually, because you not only talked about your journey by expanding the conversation and sharing the history and the practice and aesthetic practices of Kandyan dance.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure talking to the two of you and sharing my experience and my journey through the dance so far.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Today's episode of Off-Season Chats would not have been possible without the support and encouragement of our amazing listeners and the following people. We edit podcasts for audio engineering, Sangeeta Kaushik for graphic design of our logo, and a very special thanks to Wesley Beeks and Bertel King Jr. Like what you heard? Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and other streaming services. Subscribe to the podcast and tell your friends about us so that more people can find this show. You can also join our conversation by following us on social media at Off the Beat Dance on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, or by visiting us at www.offthebeat.dance. We'd love to hear from you. Off the Beat is a passion project, and we really need your help to make this podcast a long-term and sustainable venture. Please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/offthebeatdance so that we can continue to bring you more content. And together, we can create a new dance future, one beat at a time.
Join us next week as we talk to Brinda Guha, who is a New York-based Kathak, Manipuri, and contemporary dancer. This will be part 1 of a 2-part episode featuring Brinda.
Off-Season Chats is an Off the Beat production. Da, dee, na. Da, dee, na. Da, dee, na.